Hi, this is Victoria Wolders, your My Kids Locker COVID-19 Ed podcast host. Thanks so much for joining us today. We have a wonderful story called the Calico Cave, and I think you'll enjoy listening and doing some activities with this beautiful story. Well, I hope that you're all comfortable, and you will now listen to part 1.
Are you comfy? Are you cozy? Well, get ready to listen.
Well, here we are in part 1. We're so glad that you're here. And it's an opportunity for us to take some time to listen to a mindful statement. Well, today's word is courage. Yes, courage. Courage means the choice and willingness to confront pain. Sometimes in our lives, we have struggle. Sometimes we have pain. The word courage helps us describe those experiences where we're overcoming pain. The choice and willingness to confront pain. How have you overcome pain? How have others in your life overcome pain? Take some time today to think about the word courage and how you have been courageous, or how people around you have shown courage. Well, we are now moving on to part 2.
Hi everyone, welcome back to part 2 today. We are going to create something amazing, and let's get crafty. Bye.
Well, here we are in part 2. So happy that you've been able to continue our journey with us. Today, we are going to be listening to the story, The Calico Cave. The activity today is you're going to be focusing on telling your understanding. So, empathy is feeling what another person feels. This week, we are focusing on empathy, on which means to feel what another person feels. Taking the time to listen to the story and try to write down words of how the character is feeling is the focus today. Those students who want to draw and aren't able to do anything other than draw a picture, feel free to do that. But those boys and girls that can, or those students that can, please do so. So, those students who want to enhance their assignment can write about one emotion: happiness, sadness, fear, joy, and then write how you are connected to the character. So I'll say that one more time. While you're listening to the story, I want you to think about feelings. Write down what feelings the characters are going through. And for those students who want to enhance a little bit, you can decide to write about one emotion and then write how you are connected to that character. So, for example, if you were to be sad, then you would, or the character was to be sad, you would say, the character is sad, and then you say, I've been sad before, and this is my situation that I've been sad in. My dog passed away. So you can use a descriptive word of emotion, and then you can write down how you are connected to the character. Well, I hope that you enjoy the story. Today's story is called The Calico Cave. It's about how 2 elves become part of a web of gossip, hurt, and forgiveness. Learn how the Calico King helps reconcile the Emerald Elf with the baker, that is the giant, in his Calico Cave. Well, I hope that you enjoy the story, and without further ado, here is the story of the Calico Cave.
Once upon a time, a long time ago, in the Oak and Eagle Kingdom, there lived elves. These elves were part of the land of the Southern Eagle. They used to love being in their caves, and that's where they lived. They lived in colored caves that were in the land of the Southern Eagle. The caves were found in mountains that were colorful. These mountains were called the colorful mountains. There was turquoise mountain and purple mountain and yellow mountain and blue mountain and green mountain and all different types of mountains with different names. The caves that were found in these colorful mountains were called the colorful caves. And not only because of their color, but because they had different gems and jewels embedded in the walls of these caves. So if somebody was looking at the colorful mountains and the sun was setting just in the right spot, what would happen would be the sunlight would get into the caves and there would be gleaming, beaming bursts of light, and they would shine because of the emeralds and opals and diamonds that were found deep into the caves. Many people stood in awe of these beautiful caves. The green cave was where the emerald elf was from. The red cave was where the ruby elf was found. And often these elves would love to just spend time in their caves. These caves were absolutely splendid. We don't know exactly how these caves were formed, yet we do know that the elves loved living in them. And the emerald elf had a family, and the ruby elf had a family, and each of their families dwelt within their caves. The only thing was these elves, in order to make money and provide for their families, they had to be runners. Elves were known across the Oak and Eagle Kingdom to be very fast runners, and they would often be the ones that would be hired to run messages from village to village throughout the Oak and Eagle Kingdom. These messages were very important, and often royalty and wizards would use them to give messages to very important people. Early in the morning, the sun rose, and the sun would often hit these caves. They would gleam beautiful colors, and that's when the elves would wake up. The emerald elf and the ruby elf would get out of bed and out of their cave, say goodbye to their families, and they would start running from village to village to village. They just kept going. Well, there was one problem that both the emerald elf and the ruby elf had in common. They both did not like dogs. However, giants love dogs, and giants lived throughout the Oak and Eagle Kingdom. Yet most of the giants lived in the land of the Eastern Eagle in the giants' village. There was a rule among the land that the giants had to contain their dogs. One day, when the emerald elf had left his green cave, he started on his normal day. He was running from village to village to village, and all of a sudden, he came across a dog. He said, "Oh, this dog looks really nice." However, the dog barked very loudly, and he scared the emerald elf. The emerald elf was upset. So, the emerald elf went up to the giant and said, "Excuse me, giant, I am the emerald elf, and your dog is scaring me. Do you think you could put your dog either close to you, or maybe make sure that your dog doesn't bark at me and the other elves? The ruby elf and myself both really do not like dogs." Well, the giant had a hard time empathizing. He had had a hard time showing compassion in the past. He too had walked away from his village, and he had someone not say sorry to him just within the last day. He was angry at that person, and he was still angry that morning. Just then, the giant decided to say, "No, I like my dog, and my dog has freedom to do whatever he wants." The emerald elf looked at him, quite sad. He said, "What is your name?" And the giant replied, "I am the baker in the giant's village. I have just gone for a walk, and I don't see a problem with my dog." The emerald elf became sad, and he said, "I just think that it would be nice for you to respect everyone and to make sure your dog does not bite or bark at anyone, because dogs scare me." The emerald elf was quite upset because he was afraid that this dog would bite him. The baker looked at him and said, "Sorry, my dog is going to bark, and I hope that you have a good day." And the baker turned away and walked away from the scared emerald elf. Well, the emerald elf just kept running from village to village. Yet while he was running from village to village, he was quite angry at what had happened and his conversation with the baker. He went to the land of the northern eagle. He went to the land of the eastern eagle. He went to the land of the western eagle and the southern eagle, all within a day, which was quite a long day for him. But while he was in each land, he shared the story with other people. When he shared the story with other people, he shared it only in his perspective. He shared that the giant that was talking to him was not very nice. He started to say, "I think he's the one who's the baker." Well, soon word got around that the giant was the baker from the giant's village, and he was not nice. Over the several weeks that followed, the baker started to lose business in his bakery. Wizards, fairies, elves, royalty, and many others just chose not to come to his bakery because of the way he treated the emerald elf. The emerald elf went back to his own life. One day, the emerald elf was doing his normal runs of passing messages from village to village, and he bumped into another giant. This giant was the woodsman. He used to collect the wood and bring the wood into the town, and he was named the woodsman giant from the giant's village. The emerald elf would often bump into his dogs, yet his dogs were very kind and gentle. This one time, the woodsman giant apologized for his dogs barking so loud, and the emerald elf was very grateful. The emerald elf started to share his story with the others in each of the lands. People started to know that the woodsman from the giant's van, and often people were very kind to him because of his kindness he had shown to the emerald elf. One day, the emerald elf was talking to a traveler, and he said, "I cannot believe that the baker had been so rude to me. I cannot believe that he chose to tell me that his dog was going to continue to bark, and maybe he might even bite." The traveler turned to him and said, "Are you sure he said he was going to bite you?" And the emerald elf looked at him and said, "I think so." The traveler turned to him and said, "Do you realize that your story impacts other people and how they view this baker? Did you know the baker is losing money?" At that very point, when the emerald elf was talking to the traveler, the king happened to be walking by. This was a special king. This was the king that was named the Calico King. He was also found in the mountains, and he had a Calico Cave. This cave was the most richest cave in all of the colorful mountains, and it was absolutely splendid because his cave was also a castle. The Calico King came to him and said, "I would like you to come to my cave, and I'd like to have a conversation with you and with the ruby elf." Now, the king both knew that the ruby elf and the emerald elf were the runners throughout the whole Oak and Eagle Kingdom. He knew that their words had power to change people's perspectives and attitudes. So that evening, the ruby elf and the emerald elf went to the Calico Cave. As soon as they went into the Calico Cave, they were amazed at the beauty of the stones that were in the walls. There were beautiful embedded gems and jewels, rubies, emeralds, opals, diamonds. It was much more beautiful than their own caves. There was white diamonds and yellow diamonds too. They were just so beautiful. And the Calico Cave opened up into a beautiful castle. The ruby elf and the emerald elf said, "I wonder why he has called both of us here." The emerald elf then said, "I think it might be because of me." The ruby elf turned to the emerald elf and said, "Did you do something?" The emerald elf said, "I am very scared of dogs, and the baker from the giant's village was not very nice to me. However, the woodsman was very nice to me, so I've been sharing my stories of both of them." The ruby elf looked at the emerald elf and said, "Have you chosen to listen to their stories? Have you chosen to be kind?" Just at that point, the sun was setting. The whole cave was colored in a beautiful sunset of colors, and all the gems and jewels reflected off the light. It looked like a hallway of light. The king walked through and welcomed the two elves. He said, "Thank you for coming to my Calico Cave. It is an honor. Now, I ask you, what have you learned about the baker and the woodsman in the giant's village?" "I've learned that the baker is a bad man, and the woodsman giant is a good man. That's what I've heard from our villagers." The ruby elf looked at the emerald elf and said, "Emerald elf, you are my friend. You have always been kind to me. And yet I have heard that you have been spreading some bad words about the baker. I do know, Emerald Elf, that the baker has lost business because of your words. And as I have run from village to village to village, I too have heard stories, and they all started with your situation with him about his dog." The Calico King looked at the Emerald Elf. He said, "I do not mean to shame you, and the Ruby Elf does not mean to shame you. We want to help you to be a better person." The Calico King looked at the Emerald Elf and said, "Have you gotten to know them? Have you gotten to know both of their stories? Do you know what makes them happy? Do you know what makes them sad? Do you know why they are who they are?" The Emerald Elf said, "No, I have not. I've only had a couple minutes of interaction with both the baker and the woodsman. The Calico King gently responded, "It's okay. It's really important, before we judge, to know the backstory, the true story of our friends in our kingdom. That day when you bumped into the baker, I just happened to be on the hillside nearby, and I watched the baker, who had been crying before you came to him. He had been talking to himself as well. He was so sad because people had told him he shouldn't be a baker anymore. And when you bumped into him, it was at that point where he had been very sad. He had had something sad happen to him the day before, and he had something sad happen to him just before you met him. He was angry in his heart. Did you know that you met him at the point where he was the most vulnerable and the most sad? Don't you think that it would be good to learn to lean into his stories and perhaps help him see that maybe his pain that he was sharing with you was really the pain that was in his... Perhaps next time you can say to him, "Help me understand why you're doing this," instead of judging him. The Emerald Elf looked at him and said, "You're right." The Calico King turned and looked at the Ruby Elf. "You do not know the Woodsman Giant. You don't know... You've gotten to know him?" The Ruby Elf said, "No." And the Calico King said, "Well then, take some time to get to know him. Maybe you will understand what his life is about. Maybe you'll have a deeper appreciation for him. I also encourage you to get to know the baker, and you to have a deeper relationship with the baker as well. Both of these giants need care. Both of them need to have words of kindness spread throughout the land." He looked at both of them. "Your roles are very, very important in the Oak and Eagle Kingdom. You two are the only runners throughout the whole land. You see and meet so many people. Your leadership is important, and your words and actions will spread kindness, or it could spread harm. I encourage you deeply to remember that just the angle of the sunset, as the sun is setting, the gems and jewels in this cave will reflect a brilliant, magnificent beauty. And you too can do the same. If you share the same perspective on both of these giants, then you can share kindness and people will feel warmer to them. Choose to be kind." The Calico King, the Emerald Elf, and the Ruby Elf all talked. And as they were talking, the gleaming of the Calico Cave of the reds, browns, whites, and yellows just gleamed throughout the whole beautiful, magnificent cave castle. It was magical. The cave became alive with glimmering light. The Calico King said, "I want you to invite both of them up to our Calico Cave, and we're going to have a dinner at sunset tomorrow. Ask them to bring their dogs." The Emerald Elf and the Ruby Elf looked at each other, and they realized they both had very important roles in being able to spread kindness and relationship and connection throughout their Oak and Eagle Kingdom. So the next morning, the Emerald Elf and the Ruby Elf went running down the hill. They went into the giant's village, into the land of the Eastern Eagle, and they found the baker and the woodsman. At first, the baker was sad, and so the Ruby Elf had to talk to the baker, because the baker had been so hurt by the Emerald Elf that the baker had a hard time listening to what the Emerald Elf had to say. When they went to see the woodsman listened to both of them. The elves asked them if they'd like to join them for dinner. That evening, they all sat down on top of a hilltop in a cave called the Calico Cave with the Calico King. They sat down and began a conversation about understanding perspective and understanding each of their stories. The baker began to tell how sad he was because he had had people tell him he was not good at his job and that he was angry. And he had met the Emerald Elf and unfortunately had chosen to be unkind to him. The giant was angry, and he transferred that anger onto the Emerald Elf. And the Emerald Elf chose to tell others about that. The Emerald Elf and the Ruby Elf turned to the baker and said that they wanted to spread positive messages throughout the Oak and Eagle Kingdom about the baker. The Emerald Elf turned to the baker and said, "I should have never treated you this way. It was unkind of me, and I talked behind your back." The woodsman giant said, "Help me understand what your life is about, and then we can start talking about how we all are trying to do the best we can with the skills we have." Both giants dealt with eye problems, and their dogs were important in helping them with their vision because it was blurry. Sometimes the barking of the dog actually see where their dogs were. It's really hard to hate someone when you lean in and get to know them, said the Calico King. Throughout this dinner and throughout the understanding of the Calico King, they had wonderful conversations, and they came to understand each other's perspectives in a deep, deep way. All three of them, the Ruby Elf, the Emerald Elf, and the Calico King, became connected with the two giants. And all five of them developed compassion, empathy, and forgiveness for each other's stories. The elves, the giants, and the Calico King learned about friendship. All of them agreed to meet once a month in the Calico Cave at sunset to learn more about each other and to celebrate the beauty of their differences and to celebrate the sunset as it shines into the Calico Cave and shows the gleaming, brilliant beauty of the gems and jewels that were really, truly in their hearts now. The end.
Hi everyone, it's time to innovate, part 3. Woo.
Well, here we are in part 3. In this part, we get to use an extension lesson, and I'm so excited that you are here to listen to our extension lesson. Caves are amazing locations throughout the world. Some of the longest caves go on for miles and miles and miles. Some of them are very dark. Think about the last time you were in a dark cave. Think about the last time you were in a dark place. Ask your parents if you can go on the internet and look up different caves around the world and pick your favorite one. Perhaps ask your teacher about what type of caves are out there that are interesting. Then Google map the distance from your home to that cave. What transportation would you have to take there? Okay, I'm going to say it one more time. In this part, you're going to look up caves on the internet. Look up different ones around the world. Then you're going to pick one favorite. Once you've picked your favorite, you're going to find the distance from your home to that cave. And then try to think about what type of transportation you need to get there. Can you walk there? Can you fly there? How do you get there? And you get to figure that out. Okay, well, we are going to conclude now. If you need to put a pause on the podcast, feel free to do that. Okay, well, I hope that you enjoyed today's educational lesson. I hope that you enjoyed today's learning episode. Perhaps I'll be able to see you again at another episode, and I hope that you enjoyed learning a little bit about empathy and compassion today. Until next time, boys and girls, continue to listen, create, and innovate. Take care.